Hello and welcome to another episode of the Real EFL preview show, where we look ahead to some of the games that we've got coming up this weekend. And this weekend, it is super special. Now, before we get started and before I introduce my co-host over here, please do remember to like and subscribe, share the video as well. Our first video went down really well, so thank you so much to everybody who watched and interacted. This one's going to be a little bit more interesting because it is FA Cup weekend. Now, before I go any further, I must introduce Kyle. So Kyle is my co-host. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing wonderful, thank you. I love the first round of the FA Cup weekend. It brings back I'm only young anyway, but it brings back good memories as a child. With my granddad, I remember probably 10 or so years ago now, we'd watch some of the games on the opening weekend on the Friday night, and I remember doing little bits of writing about a couple of games on an envelope, and because when I get going, I can't stop. I think I ended up writing about on 6 different envelopes for one of the games. So yeah, always good memories as a Lincoln fan, the FA Cup also.
And you are going to approximately, you think, 3 FA Cup games this weekend?
Yep, so I've made the lovely decision to go to Cheshire on Monday to watch Lincoln, which I'm sure will be very, very good, more so from their perspective in terms of hoping for an upset. Friday night, I'm hoping to go to Notts County versus Albion, and then Saturday, I will be going to Bradford versus Aldershot.
Now, I'm not quite as committed as you. I've got one FA Cup tie this weekend, which I'll also be at Cheshire on Monday night. But can I have a pass for going to Werder Bremen and Borussia Mönchengladbach on Sunday and Victoria, Cologne and Stuttgart on Friday? So I think, do I qualify as a fanatic as well today?
You do indeed. I'm extremely jealous of German football. So yeah, that is definitely a valid way to spend your weekend.
But the highlight will be Cheshire versus Lincoln. But we're not here to talk about Lincoln. We talked about Lincoln on the first episode that we did. Now, as Lincoln City fans, we do have really fond memories of the FA Cup, the run in 2016-17. My memories of the FA Cup, believe it or not, because I may be using a filter by accident, actually go all the way back to 1987 when I watched Lincoln beat Crewe. Lincoln were a Vauxhall Conference team at the time. Crewe were in Division 4, but Crewe had David Platt playing for them, who obviously went on to captain England, and we won 2-1. And then we lost 4-3 away at Mansfield in the next round. So there's always that anti-climax. But it was nice that my very first FA Cup game was a giant killing. And that's really what the magic, I think, of the FA Cup is about. When people talk about the magic of the FA Cup, it's about the smaller clubs getting an opportunity to pit their wits against bigger opposition and quite often come out on top. So what we've done today to get us started is both Kyle and I have picked a game where we think there is a potential giant killing. I'll go with my pick first. And I have again drawn on my vast experience of FA Cup football to pull one of the most famous giant killing names of all time out of the bag, which was Woking. Now, back in the day, I remember Woking playing West Brom in the FA Cup, 1-0 down at half time, and a player called Tim Buzaglo hit 3 in the second half for West Brom to lose 4-2. And then I think Woking went on to play Everton, I think, in the next round and ended up narrowly losing 1-0. Now, I haven't picked Woking purely because it's Woking and it's giant killing, but it's a really tough game. I've picked Woking versus Cambridge. Now, my justification for this is a little wayward because actually since winning their 4th qualifying round game, Woking haven't won in 3 fixtures, whereas Cambridge have won their last 3 fixtures all to 0. I think they've beaten Burton, Albion in that little run. They've beaten Stevenage in that little run, and they've beaten Wigan as well. Prior to that, they looked really, really dire. When this game first came out the hat, it had giant killing clasped all over it. I still think it does. Now, often I think people mistakenly look at the National League and think the teams that are doing really well in the National League are primed for a giant killing. It can be the case, as we know with Lincoln. But sometimes it's the ones where they need a little bit of a boost. I think Woking actually are probably in a little bit of a false position in the National League. Not really playoff challenges, but I think 18th at the moment is probably a little bit to their detriment. Whereas Cambridge's 3 wins on the bounce, I think, are a little bit look a little bit favourable to them. So I've gone for Woking versus Cambridge. I think it'll be tough for Cambridge to go to Woking. I think it's going to be a tough place to go get a result. They've been the underdogs nearly all season, by the way, Cambridge, getting beat so many times. Every game they go into, they expect to be beat. This one, they're expected to really take Woking apart. And I think there's a a sneaky hint of giant killing here, Kyle. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. Speaking about Cambridge, when the draw was made, Cambridge still hadn't won a game, and then, as you say, ever since they had that game actually on the FA Cup fourth qualifying weekend, Cambridge against Birmingham, that was called off. Which many at the time would probably have thought that was the first game that Birmingham were going to put 5 or 6 past the side. But yeah, since then, Cambridge, 3 wins on the bounce, as you say. Stevenage, a particularly difficult place to go at the best of times. Wigan as well, beating them at home. Wigan always, well, this season particularly, very, very tight at the back, scoring twice against them. And as we say, not conceded in them 3 games so far. And yeah, on the other hand, with Woking, I believe in the National League for a fair amount of time now. A couple of seasons ago, they spent quite big trying to get out, and it hasn't yet happened. And as you say, probably should be a couple of places higher than where they are. They're only 4 points clear of the bottom 4 at current. But yeah, it's a really good chance, and these are always the games you kind of look for. The lower league side at home, hopefully backed by a fairly big crowd. I mean, Cambridge in itself isn't massively far from Woking. So yeah, you look at this and go, well, it should have a bit of a giant killing written all over it.
Now, there were 2 Woking players I also picked out as key, and one of them is actually the goalkeeper, Will Jeskalainen, who played, I think, 80-odd games for Crewe 2017 to 2022, and his career's kind of faltered a little bit then. But I always thought he was a decent keeper. I think he's going to be key because Cambridge will look to create chances. They've got some decent players going forward. And they can create. They certainly created when I saw them play against Lincoln earlier in the season with the likes of Dan and Lunderloo, etc. But Woking are almost on the cusp of getting Charlie Kendall scoring. Now, Charlie Kendall was a scoring sensation for Eastbourne Borough, since been, as we know, with Lincoln. Loan spell for Sutton United, never really kind of got going. He's got 3 so far this season. And I just wonder if it's the sort of game where one of those players who has almost been on the cusp of making a name for himself will see the opportunity. If Charlie Kendall scores a goal that defeats Cambridge and is the giant killing goal, it creates a whole new kind of persona for him. Similar to Roy Essendon for Wickham. He scored a winning goal a few years ago, I think, against Leicester. I mentioned Tim Bazaglo. And we can even go all the way back to Ronnie Radford and Hereford in the 70s. If you get that goal that creates that giant killing, it can really give your career a little bit of a kickstart. And as Lincoln fans know, FA Cup Theo did that to great to great success, didn't he? Scoring purely in the FA Cup at Lincoln and moving on to Southend. So I think it gives the opportunity to Woking players just to try and lift their game a little bit, just to kind of put themselves in the shop window. And by the way, he's not the only player there who we could see kind of be a little bit of a success. He's not the only young player who can see this as a stage on which to perform on. So I think it could be a dangerous one for Cambridge. Now, if we segue on, one of the games that Cambridge has recently won is against Burton Albion. So that moves us onto your game, Kyle. not yes. As smoothly as I would have liked, to be honest, but that moves us onto your game.
Yeah, this is my pick, definitely. You look at Burton still without a manager after sacking Mark Robinson last week. They've lost they lost every game they played this month. 7 in all 7 in the league, 8 in all competitions in a row. So you look at everything kind of points towards a giant killing, but then the FA Cup is the competition that can sort of kickstart your campaign, and that's what Burton have to go and do. I think briefly we spoke about last week and said that Burton, particularly on the opening day when I saw them play Lincoln, they looked a decent side. So to see them struggling so much and now bottom of League One was a real surprise, to be honest. This is the kind of game that you want on one hand to try and get a result and then go on and try and pick some points up on the board. But then on the other hand, you're at home, you're definitely expected to win. If you don't, the mood just continues to get worse and worse. And Scarborough aren't exactly pulling up any trees in the National League North. I think they sit 13th. But they did beat Scunthorpe, who were top of the table last month, and they beat Marine in their last game. Had lost 2 before that. So yeah, for me, on paper, this looks the most likely game to cause an upset. But you never know. As I say, Burton have got to look at this game and have to prioritise getting only their 2nd win of the season in all competitions.
Yeah, now this would obviously be a huge giant killing with them with Scarborough being National League North, I believe. But they've got an interesting little setup there, haven't they? Is John Greening the manager, who was the former Manchester United and Middlesbrough man? I may be wrong on that. And I also think they've got Richie Bennett up front, kind of a 33-year-old who's been around the blocks. But again, he's the sort of player that will understand what's needed in this type of game. But as you're focusing on Burton, I think the game I looked at was really kind of the Woking and what Woking may be able to do there, the home side, whereas this game is really what Burton may not be able to do. Because actually on paper, Burton have got a great squad. They haven't got a tune out of that squad. And I think the mass upheaval in the summer has come back to haunt them. And one thing Burton have done really well over the last 6 or 7 seasons is be rubbish and then make a huge change, massive squad turn, and suddenly be good for 6 months or 8 months and then drop off a cliff again. The mistake they made, in my opinion, this summer was trying to just do a huge reinvention of what they are. Suddenly they wanted to play football. Suddenly they'd outcast all of their squad. They just wanted rid of everybody. And whilst they made some really good signings, it just hasn't settled. And it's almost like, because it's different players and a different manager, it shouldn't be that the fabric of the club, which was quite, with respect, direct, strong, us against them mentality, and that's kind of been taken away from them. But that's exactly what Scarborough will need in order to win the game, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you've got to look at sides that you just play to your strengths, really. You kind of accept what you are. When Lincoln got promoted from the National League and even during the Cup run, they were by no means the best footballing side, but you do what you have to do to get you where you want to be. And as you say, that's what Burton have done so well. I'm not being funny, they're a fairly small side. You look at the ground capacity, everything, up until where they were, and I'm not being funny, they play championship football as well. You just have to stick to what you're good at. And yeah, again, I think we spoke about Burton last week and said about how this massive upheaval hadn't worked and what they now do in terms of getting a new manager. And I don't actually believe they're any closer to appointing a manager at the moment. So this has got to be kind of the game where any potential onlookers who are potentially looking at coming and managing them have got to see what Burton are about. And as you say, the quality they've got in the squad should be more than good enough to win this game, but they will face a real fight against a Scarborough side looking to cause a massive, massive upset.
Yeah, and before we move on, just keep an eye out for Frank Mulhern. Something about him impresses me. He was a former Leeds United youngster. He's at Scarborough now. He's only scored 3 goals, I think, in the National League this season. But something just stands out. I think this could be an afternoon for him. And certainly if him and Bennett can combine up top, I think it'd be really interesting and really challenging afternoon for Burton. Now, we've also picked what I think is the tie of the first round. Now, it's all well and good for you to look at your Russell Athletics and your Scarborough Athletics and your teams that are coming from all the weird and wonderful corners of the football pyramid to play against the so-called elite. But sometimes the FA Cup just throws up a game that when the draw comes out, the nation goes, yeah, of course, that's obviously going to be the draw. This is the game. I don't know if it's on television. I haven't looked at the television schedule, but it should be. It should be the televised game. It should be the first televised game, because for me, it's everything right about football against everything wrong about football. We are, of course, talking about MK Dons versus Wimbledon. Now, I know, Carl, you're only a baby, so you may not remember when the original Wimbledon went to the wall and MK Dons or whatever, Milton Keynes came in and snatched the club away. It should never have been allowed to happen. Wimbledon obviously then kind of folded, became a Phoenix club, rose through the ashes, took Lincoln's place, and I know we keep going on about Lincoln, but took our place in the Football League, by the way, in 2011, which made it a little bit of a bitter pill to swallow. But whenever this game comes around, there's always such heated interest. And is it the pick of the first round ties, do you think?
I certainly think it's up there. It is not a televised game, which, by the way, I think if this was the other way round, you would get a sellout crowd at Wimbledon, and that alone, along with the game being there, a lot of Wimbledon fans don't recognise MK Dons, as we all know, and there's always the scoreboard and the programme that every time the game comes around gets brought up from a Wimbledon perspective. A lot of the fans at Wimbledon also don't go to MK Dons. So anyone kind of looking at this expecting to see like, oh, Wimbledon will take over MK Dons, there'll be more away. That doesn't happen. I also wasn't born when the whole MK Dons at FC Wimbledon. Right. Actually, no, I'm just giving that a bit of perspective of how long ago that feels. Personally, I've obviously read up and seen. I didn't actually know that about Lincoln. That MK Dons had taken Lincoln's whenever it happened, which is massively interesting to find out. Turning to the game itself, if Wimbledon had been at home, you'd have had to back them. They've played 5, won 5. They've obviously played less than every other team in League Two due to their pitch issues. Had they played the full 14 games, you would, if you times the points per game, etc., you'd be looking at a side in the playoffs in League Two and would be above MK Dons. Now, the last time these two played, AFC Wimbledon were rampant, won 3-0. But of course, MK Dons now have Scott Lindsay as manager, and since he's taken over, they've taken more points than everyone bar Port Vale. So you do have a really, really interesting game on our hands on Sunday. And yeah, you look at this game instantly, and had it not been a league game this season, I think it probably would have been a televised game.
Now, I've got a couple of interesting facts, and I do use the word interesting really loosely here, as I do on all the podcasts that I ever do. So the first time MK Dons and Wimbledon met each other was actually in the FA Cup, and that was a 2-1 win to MK Dons. In the first 2 fixtures between the two clubs, there was a goal scored in the 90th minute on both occasions. And on the last 2 fixtures between the two clubs, there have been 3 goals scored in the 90th minute, 2 in the last game and 1 in the game before. So you could be looking at a game that really goes to the death. And it kind of epitomizes for me what I'd say proper football is all about, because there is a rivalry here. And I know it kind of goes without saying, but it's like, it's not one of these fake rivalries. It's not one of these rivalries that sprung up out of something absolutely ridiculous, like a comment in the newspaper or something. It's a proper rivalry, like a local derby, that goes beyond that. It goes beyond even kind of just disliking each other. It's deep-rooted, kind of honest football, pure football, original football against what people perceive to be, this demon behemoth of MK Dons. They were meant to be Premier League. They were meant to be back. They've got this huge, great big stadium that only, like they get 5,000 or whatever in a 25,000 stadium. But like you say, you take all of that away when the away fans don't really go, and that it isn't a shame. Well, it is a shame. It's not a shame for the Wimbledon fans because they're making their statement, which is quite right, fair play. If Lincoln were taken by Notts County, I wouldn't want to go and sit at Meadow Lane or whatever. Like, but even so, I just think it's going to be a huge game. Sadly, I think it's one that MK Dons may triumph in. As you say, Scott Lindsay has taken over, but actually there's only 2 points between the teams, and Wimbledon have got 3 games in hand in the league. They've actually looked really good in the league. Here we go again. Lincoln loanee Ali Smith has really been pulling the strings for them in the midfield as well.
Yeah, what I will say is Wimbledon, I know you can use all the cliches and go, form goes out the window in the cup and in a game like this. But Wimbledon, as I said earlier, very good at home, pretty poor away, in all honesty. I don't think they've won away since August against Cheltenham. So on that hand, and as you've just mentioned again there, with Scott Lindsay coming in, the record since he's taken over, 14 points from 7 games, you are looking at probably a home win, unfortunately, on paper from looking at obviously everything with the rivalry. I'm not trying to be biased against MK Dons, but if you look at it purely from a proper football point, then you always have to feel for Wimbledon. So yeah, I can see MK Dons winning this one.
Finally, on their last 2 trips to MK Dons, Wimbledon have actually had 3 players sent off. They had 2 players sent off in January when they met in League Two, and then they had 1 sent off January 2022, Nesta Guinness-Walker, after 36 minutes in their League One clash. So it's always eventful. MK Dons Wimbledon is definitely one to keep an eye on. Now, there are lots of other fixtures that we'd like to keep an eye on. You've certainly picked 1 or 2 out, Kyle. So which other ones have caught your eye in the first round?
I mean, we could sit here for over an hour and probably talk about every other game and the stories of it. Chesterfield Horsham, I think, is particularly an interesting one. You had Horsham last year. I went to their first round game at Barnsley, actually. They were a really good account of themselves, took Barnsley to a replay, and then obviously Barnsley were kicked out of the cup for fielding an illegible player, lost to Sutton in the second round. But they were facing the Chesterfield side, also very, very good in the cup. Last season, as a non-league side, Chesterfield beaten both Portsmouth and Leyton Orient in the first couple of rounds, lost to Watford, I believe, in the last minute. Similarly, the season before, they made it to the third round, drew to West Brom again, conceded late, and then lost the replay. So, yeah, you're looking at two sides with really good records in the cup. Exeter Barnet, another one. Exeter had a really good start to the season. Dropped a couple of points recently, but still look a good side. And you've got Barnet, many people's pick for promotion from the National League this season. Started well, third at the moment in the table. They've won 11 from 16. There is a weird quirk here that I believe the away end at Exeter used to be Barnet's stand. So Barnet are obviously the away side, so we'll be using their own stand in effect to the weekend, which is this is what the FA Cup brings, your weird stories. And my last one is Wycombe versus York. Probably not the tie that York fans were potentially looking for when the draw came out, but you've got York, who are now top of the National League. That ridiculous game at the weekend when they beat Halifax and scored twice in stoppage time. And Wycombe, who ended last season really, really well in League One, have carried that on and sit second. So you look at two sides there who many people had sort of good thoughts before the start of the season, but have both exceeded them high expectations so far. So that's a potential one to look out for in terms of an upset. And there's just a couple in terms of Accrington struggling in League Two, Russell Olympic struggling in the National League. Two sides there that want a result to kickstart their season. You've got Northampton Kettering, a local derby there as well. So yeah, there's plenty of games over the course of the weekend to look out for.
The other two that I picked, one of them was a little bit selfish because I think the FA Cup first and second rounds are all about those non-league teams. So I love those all non-league ties because you know that one of those teams is guaranteed to be in the next round. And there's a potential story in itself. And when a non-league team gets to the second round, it is actually relatively big news. The first round is given because the FA Cup fourth qualifying round gives you all of those teams, but there's no guarantee beyond that. Gainsborough versus Hednesford. I think Hednesford are the lowest ranked side left in the competition. Gainsborough are obviously also a lowly ranked side. They were one game away from the National League a few years ago, losing to Nuneaton in the playoffs. That's a massive game. And if whichever of those sides gets through, if they get a home tie in the next round, almost certainly the television cameras would be there, irrespective of who they got if they were a Football League team. And from a personal point of view, obviously, as people may have guessed, as a Lincoln City fan, it would be unbelievable to play Gainsborough Trinity. Shades of 1998 when we drew 2-2 in the first round, or 1-1 in the first round with them, I think. And then we got the replay, but the replay had to be at Sincil Bank because there was not enough seats at the North Home. So that's a big one to look out for. And finally, we have to pander a little bit, just like the BBC do, to the headliners. I like the look of Sutton versus Birmingham, just purely because Birmingham haven't been in the first round since 1995. I think they were last at this level. They don't do particularly well when they go to the smaller grounds. You know, they drew at Mansfield recently. They were run quite close by Leyton Orient a few weeks ago. I mean, Orient's a relatively big ground. Mansfield's with respect to dump with, three sides. But you go somewhere like Gander Green Lane, it's going to be tight, it's going to be awkward for them. Sutton former Football League side, looking probably just to put themselves back on the map a little bit after relegation. I think that could be really tough. And, it's all right, Christoph Klara playing in the Bundesliga, or the Williamson coming from Go Ahead Eagles, or wherever they've all come from. But, on a cold November afternoon on Gander Green Lane, where the crowd are upon you and all that sort of thing. We saw how well Sutton leveraged that in the FA Cup back in 2016-17. Lincoln City were the story, but people forget Sutton got all the way through and played Arsenal. It was 2-0, I think, wasn't it, in the end? Wayne Shaw ate his pie and all. So they've got a little bit of pedigree, and that's because it's a really awkward experience. So keep an eye out for that one. It would be the shock of the round if Sutton were to get anything against Birmingham. But just to tie this back all the way to the beginning, I spoke about Woking in the 80s and Tim Bazaglo. Who can forget if you were born, of course, Sutton in 1989 beating the 1987 winners Coventry 2-1 at Gander Green Lane. Not me. So that's the FA Cup first round. Let us know in the comments if you agree with any of our picks. Have we missed your team out? Is there a non-league team that you think are going to spring a surprise on Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, Monday evening, whenever the games are spread about, so that ITV can beam it into your house rather than you actually going? Who knows? This guy is going. He's going to at least 3 of them. I'll go to one of them, and in a week's time, we won't even be talking about it. We'll be talking about league fixtures. But anyway, there we go. That was the Real AFL Show, episode 2. Please remember to like, subscribe, tell your friends, all that sort of stuff. And it's a goodbye from me and a goodbye from him.
Goodbye.